Hello and welcome to People and Profit. I'm Charles Pellegrin. And this week we cross the channel to the United Kingdom, where the Labour government is hoping for a reboot after the resignation of Prime Minister Keir Starmer. In steps Andy Burnham, the former mayor of Greater Manchester. He's all but guaranteed to take over 10 Downing Street over the summer with a change agenda. Central to his platform is improving living standards that have stagnated or even fallen since the 2008 global financial crisis. He outlined his vision of how to do that in a speech earlier this week, as Luc Schrago explains.
The former mayor of Manchester and likely future British Prime Minister has been clear about how he'll handle an ailing United Kingdom by devolving power across the nation.
We will bring about the biggest rebalancing of power our country has seen. It is time for Whitehall to accept that growth cannot be ordered from the top down. Instead, it can only be nurtured from the bottom up.
Andy Burnham set out what he called a 10-year plan to reverse nearly 2 decades of low growth, promising the largest programme of social housing construction since World War II, the creation of new industrial jobs, reform of inefficient and privately run utilities, and the opening of a new government office in Manchester to oversee regional development, all within current fiscal rules.
The change will be the biggest change in our lifetimes to the way the country is run, and it is consistent with the 2024 manifesto. We will create a more streamlined state with a clearer purpose to power up all parts of the country and put a laser-like focus on growth and regeneration.
It would see a huge measure of the power that's been concentrated in London and the UK's southeast for virtually its entire history handed to local authorities. However, Burnham was light on details as to how it would all be funded amid an ongoing budget crunch and limited room for financial manoeuvring, worsened by major pressure to boost defence spending with both a hostile Russia looming and traditional allies in Washington DC increasingly unreliable. Should his challenge to replace the outgoing Keir Starmer remain unopposed, Burnham could find himself the UK's 7th leader in less than 10 years as soon as July 20th.
For more on Burnham's vision for the UK economy, let's speak with Renaud Foucart, Senior Lecturer in Economics at Lancaster University. Renaud, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So before we get into Andy Burnham's proposals, let's start with the backdrop. He says Britain is broken economically. What's happened to living standards over the past 2 decades?
If you look at today's earnings in the UK, in particular for the middle class, we are talking about people who slowly earn a bit more than before the financial crisis. So the existential moment for the UK is 2008. You had this very confident, cool Britannia with a major financial hub in London that was the financial hub of all of Europe. And then the financial crisis bites, and the UK never truly recovers from that. So there's been the time of austerity, so cuts in public services, but this was 20 years ago. Since then, the UK has tried a lot of different things, but there is still the same problem. That means that there are more and more prime ministers coming faster and faster and crazy decisions like Brexit. That means that people feel there is something wrong, but they cannot exactly pin down on how to restart the economy from this 2008 shock on the financial center of London.
Burnham argues that too much economic power is concentrated in Westminster and Whitehall, and that giving cities and regions greater control over transport, over local taxation and planning, that would boost growth. Economically, why would devolution make such a difference?
The big sales pitch of Burnham is, I was the mayor of Greater Manchester. I was one of the first persons to finally have devoluted power at the citywide level, and I achieved great things, starting with public transport. So the inheritance of the Thatcher year was not so much privatization in Burnham's view. It was the fact that a lot of services that used to be publicly provided have been cut in tiny slices that were not efficient together. So the B network, Manchester Public Transport System, is just taking all of those buses, tramway, metro together and making them work as in any normal European cities. And for the first time in decades, more people are taking public transport in Manchester. But more generally, there is this idea that there is no incentives to do things and to build in the country. Perhaps the richest part of England right now is the Oxford-Cambridge corridor. Lots of science, innovation hub, but you cannot build there because they've not built water reservoir, because it's very, very hard to allow construction there. And the reason for that is that the localities don't benefit from it. The tax system is such that often, by allowing to build things on your territory, you are losing money as a local authority. So what Burnham is trying to sell the country is that, okay, we don't have magic money right now. The UK is very, very constrained fiscally, but what we can do is to give local authorities the incentives to grow and to have growth that moves away from just London, but from all over the country, where there will be new opportunities simply because people have an interest in building stuff.
So it's a question of incentives there. But is this blueprint of Manchester that Burnham keeps putting forward, this idea of Manchesterism, is it really something that's scalable to the whole country?
There is clearly, even if you compare to a country as centralized as France, in the UK, in particular in England, a huge amount of centralization. So Burnham is far from being the first one to say there is something wrong with the concentration of wealth in the south of the country. Boris Johnson came to power largely because of that. But when Boris Johnson started to do what he called levelling up, he didn't come to his mind to do it by giving power to the north. No, what he did was to say, in London, we're going to have a department for levelling up, and then everyone will send their bid and explain their little project. And of course, it doesn't work as smoothly. So the bet of Burnham is to do something that is completely different, but that is very close to what a lot of European countries do, which is to have something close to regions, to large city regions, and give them a chance to do things in a way that works. And this is something that has worked elsewhere, but there has been a lot of resistance for that in the UK. A large part is cultural, but also, before Brexit, there was another referendum. There was a referendum on devolution in the Northeast, and English voters have voted against that. So far, is restarting this machine and trying to say, can we do something better by aligning interest at the local level? And yes, I think there is a lot of possibilities around that.
Burnham's also promised the biggest public housing program in decades. He wants to build over 1.5 million new council houses, while also promising, obviously, not to abandon the fiscal rules that have been set by the current Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. Can those two promises realistically coexist? Where would the money come from?
You enter the difficult part, is that Andy Burnham is not only this man who wants to reform and decentralize, he's also the soft left of the Labour Party, meaning he wants to show things that are slightly to the left of Keir Starmer. So this program of national house building, it faces a real problem. No, there have been objectives in house building, and no one is meeting them simply for the incentive problem I explained before. But what Burnham is saying is the government will do it. He doesn't say who. It could be local authorities. It could be that local taxes will be used to that, but he's very far from being detailed on that.
He also wants to revive Britain's struggling high street, including by reforming business rates and giving local authorities a stronger incentive to encourage investment. What kinds of reforms could actually make a difference? And why is the focus on the high street?
This is a very important symbol of decline in England. You go to one of those deprived cities and you see all those empty shops on the high street. And this is something that is clearly correlated with people being angry. So for instance, you know that in places that have seen a lot of such closures, people are much more likely to vote for Nigel Farage, for instance, much more likely to vote for Brexit. And one of the reasons for that is that the way taxation is done in the UK for business is, again, highly centralized. If you think on purely economic terms, there is no reason to have an empty shop. You just lower the rent until someone enters. But it's very complicated the way business rates are set, and sometimes, at the moment, you may lose money by opening your shop. So what he wants to do is, again, return power at the local level to change that and give local authorities a chance to take the benefits from having more shops open, and that no one will be finding themselves in a situation where you lose money by opening a shop. Visible things, that small cuts also he offers to do in pubs, just to keep those visible places of socialization in the UK visible and that people can escape somehow the sense of decline that has been so widespread in the country since the financial crisis.
And there was that study in France, obviously, relating the closure of third spaces with the rise of the far right. So there's probably a move against Nigel Farage's reform there. Finally, Burnham also says Britain doesn't necessarily need a completely different economic model. It needs government that delivers visible improvements in people's daily lives. Is that enough to reverse nearly 2 decades of weak productivity and stagnant incomes?
It doesn't have a lot of choices anyway. So because the UK is outside of the Eurozone, you've seen that every time they try to spend a little bit more in terms of deficit, the financial market immediately punish them. They don't have a European central bank covering them. So they have no choice in terms of doing much more public spending. They could do very few different things. They could rejoin the European Union, but it's completely toxic. They could completely deregulate, but this is not something a Labour government can do. So the only thing he can do is to reform a little bit from the inside by trying what nobody has tried before, decentralization. And what he can also do is being a bit more clever politically than Starmer. Starmer, he was selected on some visible objectives. Among them, for instance, he put a lot of capital on cutting migration number, cutting the small boats. He was incredibly successful with that. Next year, the UK might have a negative net migration, more people leaving the country than actually entering. Voters didn't notice and certainly are not grateful to him for that, simply because he's not been very good at doing that, or maybe that's not what they really wanted. And so the flair of Burnham is really what could make a difference, showing people that there is a path forward and giving them a little bit of interest in, spending, investing, the feeling that there is a bright future, that somehow, sometimes what people want from a successful politician.
His political strength will be as important as his economic vision there. Renaud Foucart, thank you for sharing your insights. You're a senior lecturer in economics at Lancaster University.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all for this week. Do find People and Profit on the podcast platform of your choice. In the meantime, thank you for watching and stay tuned to France 24.